6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Neil.
And I'm Sam. Many people have favourites. A favourite colour, a favourite flavour, a favourite word. What's yours, Neil?
My favourite colour is green. My favourite flavour is sweet and sour. And, well, I don't know if it's my favourite, but there is a word I really like saying out loud. Nincompoop. It means a silly person.
For me, it's the taste of coffee and the smell of lavender or freshly baked bread.
Our favourite tastes, smells and colours are controlled by our 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, taste and touch. For most of us, they don't mix. We see colours and taste flavours, but we can't taste sounds.
But that's not how everyone's brain works. Imagine being able to taste every word that you hear. In this programme, we'll meet 2 sisters from Glasgow in Scotland who can do just that. And as usual, we'll learn some new vocabulary as well.
Julie McDowell and her younger sister, Jen Macready, have synesthesia, a neurological condition where 2 or more senses mix together. When synesthetes, as they are called, hear a word, their sense of taste also becomes activated. Words produce specific tastes on their tongues. For example, when Jen hears the name of her daughter Sophia, she tastes pink marshmallows, and the name Leo tastes like noodles.
We'll hear more from the unusual sisters later, but first I have a question for you, Neil. We've just heard what happens when Jen Macready hears the names Sophia and Leo, but what does she taste when she hears the name Neil? Is it A, eggs and bacon, B, spaghetti hoops, or C, a jam sandwich?
Well, I don't know what this says about me, Sam, but I'm going to guess that it's C, a jam sandwich.
Okay, don't worry, Neil. I'll reveal the answer later in the programme. Synesthesia isn't only about people like Julie and Jen who taste words. It can be a mixing of any of our senses. A synesthete may hear colours or see sounds. In fact, there could be as many as 150 different types of synesthesia.
For the Scottish sisters, having synesthesia is a gift, something Jen explained when she talked with BBC World Service programme The Food Chain.
It's enjoyable. It's never anything that causes... The only thing I always say is it's quite hard if you're trying to eat healthily, because if you hear a word that maybe tastes like tuna, I'll be like, oh, I need to get a tuna baguette now. You know, it's almost like being pregnant and having a craving. Words can be so vivid that you want to eat that. That's the only negative I would say about it.
For Jen, the only drawback to synesthesia is that it can be hard to eat healthily because hearing certain words produces a craving, a strong feeling of wanting a particular food.
That could be because, for Jen, the sound of the word is so vivid, clear, detailed and powerful in her mind.
There's still much doctors don't know about why some people experience sense mixing, while most of us experience each sense in isolation. But it's clear that for Julie and Jen, synesthesia makes the world a more interesting, colourful place.
Someone who can explain why so little is known about synesthesia is Guy Lechziner, consultant neurologist at King's College London and author of the book The Man Who Tasted Words. Here he is speaking to BBC World Service's The Food Chain.
One of the problems with synesthesia is for many years it's been dismissed and it's been viewed as people with an overactive imagination, something not real. But actually what research in recent years has taught us is that actually it does have an underlying neurological and genetic basis.
Guy says that in the past, synesthesia was often dismissed, considered unimportant or uninteresting. Synesthetes were labelled people with overactive imaginations, a tendency to imagine things that are not true.
But research is showing that the cause of synesthesia could run in the family. Julie and Jen's brothers don't have synesthesia, but Jen's daughter does. And with an estimated 4% of the world population having some form of sense mixing, a world of new and exciting possibilities is opening up to millions.
Exciting possibilities like tasting someone's name. Remember in my question, I asked what synesthete Jen Macready tastes when she hears the name Neil.
OK, well, I guessed that Neil tastes like a jam sandwich. Was I right?
Well, Neil, no, you don't taste like a jam sandwich. In fact, when Jen hears the name Neil, she tastes spaghetti hoops. Oh well, it could be worse. The name Robert makes Jen taste rotten eggs. Sorry to any Roberts listening.
Okay, let's recap the vocabulary we've learned in this program about synesthesia, a neurological condition where two or more senses mix together.
A nincompoop is an informal way of saying a silly person.
A craving for something is the strong desire to have it.
A vivid sensation is clear, strong, and detailed in your mind.
When something is dismissed, it's considered unimportant or uninteresting.
And finally, an overactive imagination is the tendency to imagine things that are not true. Once again, our 6 minutes are up. If you've enjoyed this look into the weird and wonderful world of synesthesia, we hope you'll join us again next time for more chat, interesting issues, and useful vocabulary here at 6 Minute English. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Rob.
And I'm Sam. Here at 6 Minute English, we love to chat about new technology. One of our favourite topics is VR, or virtual reality, and the ways it's shaping life in the future.
VR allows you to put on a headset and escape into a completely different world. In this programme, we'll be hearing about some of the ways VR is tackling serious problems like domestic violence and helping people overcome phobias, the strong and irrational fear of something. And of course, we'll be learning some useful related vocabulary along the way.
People who use VR often describe the experience as intense. Putting on the headset makes you feel you're really there in whatever new world you've chosen. And it's this intensity that inventors, scientists, and therapists are using to help people overcome their problems.
We'll hear more soon, but first I have a question for you, Sam. One of the phobias VR can help with is the fear of heights. But what is the proper name for this psychological disorder? Is the fear of heights called A. Alectorophobia, B. Arachnophobia, or C. Acrophobia?
I'll say A. Alectorophobia.
OK, Sam, we'll find out the answer at the end of the programme.
Now, if, like me, you're not very good with heights, you'll be happy to know that a company called Oxford VR has designed a system to help with precisely that problem. In the safety of your own home, you put on a headset and are guided through a series of tasks, moving you higher and higher off the ground. You start by taking an elevator to the top floor of tall buildings and move on to harder challenges like climbing a rope.
Daniel Freeman is a professor of clinical psychology at Oxford University. Listen as he explains how the VR experience works to BBC World Service programme People Fixing the World.
Even though you're consciously aware it's a simulation, it doesn't stop all your habitual reactions to heights happening, and that's really important, and that's why it's got such a potential to be therapeutic. The art of successful therapy and what you can do really, really well in VR is enable someone to drop those defences. In VR, a person is more able to drop them because they know there's no real height there.
Although the VR experience seems real, the person using it knows it's only a simulation, a pretend copy of the real thing. This gives them confidence to go higher, knowing they can't really get hurt.
But although it's simulated, the experience is real enough to trick your mind into acting in its habitual way, the way it usually typically works. Although your brain knows you have both feet on the ground, VR is so realistic that to complete the tasks you have to drop your defences, a phrase meaning to relax and trust people by lowering the psychological barriers you have built to protect yourself.
Oxford VR's Fear of Heights experience uses VR to put people into another world, but the next project we'll hear about takes things even further, putting people into someone else's body.
In Barcelona, a VR simulation is being used in prisons to make men convicted of domestic violence aware of what it feels like to be in the position of their victims. The project, called Virtual Embodiment, is led by neuroscientist Mavi Sanchez Vives of Barcelona's Institute for Biomedical Research.
So in a virtual world, we can be someone different and have a first-person embodied perspective from the point of view, for example, of a different person, different gender, different age. One can go through different situations and have the experience from this totally novel perspective.
Many of the prisoners lack empathy for their victims. Virtual embodiment works by giving these men the experience of abuse in the first person, from the perspective of someone who actually experiences an event in person.
In VR, the men have the insults and abuse they gave to others turned back on them. It's a novel, a new and original experience for them, and not a pleasant one either. But the VR therapy seems to be working, and Dr. Sanchez-Vivez reports more and more of the prisoners successfully reintegrating into their communities after their release from prison.
The experience VR creates of seeing things from someone else's point of view can be therapeutic, even for serious problems. And speaking of problems, what was the answer to your question, Rob?
I asked Sam whether the correct name for the fear of heights was electrophobia, arachnophobia, or acrophobia.
I guessed it was electrophobia.
Which was the wrong answer. Electrophobia is the fear of chickens. The correct answer was C, acrophobia, a fear of heights and a good example of a phobia.
Let's recap the rest of the vocabulary we've learned, starting with simulation, a pretend copy of something that looks real but is not.
Habitual describes the usual, typical way something works.
The phrase drop your defences means to relax and trust something by lowering your psychological barriers.
In the first person means talking about something from the perspective of the person who actually experienced an event themselves.
And finally, the adjective novel means completely new and original, unlike anything that's happened before.
Well, once again, our 6 minutes are really and virtually over. Goodbye for now.
Bye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Neil.
And I'm Georgina.
This is the programme where we hope to add some colour to your life by talking about an interesting subject and teaching you some useful vocabulary.
And colour is what we're talking about today. What's your favourite colour, Neil?
Oh, I like green. A fresh, bold colour that reminds me of nature. It can have a calming effect. And you?
It's got to be blue. It reminds me of the sea, the sky and holidays, of course.
Colour, no matter which one we prefer, affects how we feel. And we'll be talking about that soon. But not before I challenge you to answer my quiz question, Georgina, and it's a science question. Do you know what the splitting of white light into its different colours is called? Is it A, dispersion, B, reflection, or C, refraction?
Well, I'm not a scientist, so I'll have to guess as C, refraction.
OK, I'll reveal the right answer later on. But now, let's talk more about colour. Colour can represent many different things, depending on where you come from. You can be green with envy, wishing you had what someone else had.
And someone can feel blue, so feel depressed. We choose colours to express ourselves in what we wear or how we decorate our home.
The BBC Radio 4 programme, You and Yours, has been talking about colour and whether it affects everyone's mood. Karen Haller is a colour psychologist and a colour designer and consultant. She explained how colour affects us.
It's the way that we take in the wavelengths of light, because colour is wavelengths of light, and it's how that comes in through our eye. And then it goes into the part of our brain called the hypothalamus, which governs our sleeping patterns, our hormones, our behaviours, our appetite. It governs everything. And so different colours and different frequencies or different wavelengths of light, we have different responses and different reactions to them.
So, colour is wavelengths of light. A wavelength is the distance between two waves of sound or light that are next to each other. As these wavelengths change, so does the colour we see.
Thanks for the science lesson. Karen also explained that there's a part of our brain that controls, she used the word govern, how we feel and how we behave, and this can change depending on what colour we see.
Interesting stuff. Of course, colour can affect us differently. Seeing red can make one person angry, but someone else may just feel energised.
Homeware and furnishing manufacturers offer a whole spectrum or range of colours to choose to suit everyone's taste and mood. But during the recent coronavirus pandemic, there was a rise in demand for intense, bright shades and patterns. This was referred to as happy design, design that was meant to help lift our mood.
Yes, and Karen Haller spoke a bit more about this on the You and Yours programme.
In the time when everyone was out and we were all working and we'd led very, very busy lives, quite often what people wanted, they wanted a very quiet sanctuary to come back to. So they had very pale colours or very low chromatic colours in their house, low saturation, because that helped them unwind, it helped them relax and to feel very soothed. But what I have found since the first lockdown is a lot of people, because they're not getting that outside stimulation, they're actually putting a lot of brighter colours in their home because they're trying to bring in that feeling that they would have got when they were out, that excitement and that buzz.
It seems that in our normal busy working lives, our homes were peaceful places and somewhere to relax. They were a sanctuary. To create this relaxing space, we use pale colours, ones that lack intensity like sky blue.
But during the recent lockdowns, when we weren't outside much, we tried to get that stimulation, that excitement or experience, by decorating our homes with brighter colour, such as yellow.
Perhaps a little too bright for me. It's all about personal taste and the connections we make with the colours we see, but it makes sense that brighter colours can certainly lift our mood.
Now, earlier I asked you, Georgina, do you know what the splitting of white light into its different colours is called? Is it A, dispersion, B, reflection, or C, refraction?
And I said it was refraction.
Sorry, Georgina, that's wrong. It's actually called dispersion. Back to school for you, but not before we recap some of today's vocabulary.
OK, firstly we can describe someone who wishes they had what someone else has as being green with envy.
We also talked about a wavelength, the distance between two waves of sound or light that are next to each other.
To govern means to control or influence.
A sanctuary can be a peaceful or relaxing place. In some cases, it can be a safe place for someone in danger.
Stimulation describes the feeling of being excited, interested or enthused by something. And pale describes a colour that lacks intensity. It's not very bright, and for me, they're much better than a bold, bright yellow.
Well, Georgina, thanks for showing your true colours. That's all for now, but we'll be picking another topic to discuss out of the blue next time.
Don't forget you can hear other 6-minute English programmes and much more on our website at bbclearningenglish.com. And we're always posting stuff on our social media platforms. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
6-minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6-minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Neil.
And I'm Sam.
We often hear phrases such as dream big or reach for the stars, which reflect an optimistic view of life. Are you an optimist, Sam?
I hope so. I try to see the positive side of life, even when something bad happens.
It sounds like you're a glass half full person, someone who always thinks that good things will happen.
How about you, Neil? Are you optimistic?
Look, things go wrong all the time. That's a fact of life. Call me a pessimist if you like, but I'm just being realistic.
It sounds like Neil is more of a glass half empty person, but the truth is that the age-old debate between optimism and pessimism is more complex than we think.
Yes, whether you're a sunny optimist or a gloomy pessimist may be determined more by your birthplace and your age than your attitude, as we'll be finding out in this programme.
Great, I've got a good feeling about this, Neil.
But first, as usual, I have a question for you, Sam. Psychologists define optimism as an attitude which overestimates the chances of good things happening to you, while underestimating the chances of bad things occurring. So, what proportion of the British population, do you think, describe themselves as optimistic? Is it A, 20%, B, 50%, or C, 80%?
I'll choose the largest, 80%.
Okay, Sam, we'll find out if your optimistic answer is the correct one later in the programme. Someone who probably wouldn't agree with you, though, is BBC World Service listener Hannah. Hannah grew up in Germany before moving to the United States. She thinks Americans tend to be more optimistic than people back home in Germany, as she told BBC World Service programme Crowd Science.
Well, I think the stereotypical perceptions of Germans is that we're quite pessimistic, and that kind of tends to come across as being a bit of a Debbie Downer, when in actuality Germans just tend to be avid planners for all eventual negative eventualities as well. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of us being pessimistic but actually being cautious, as opposed to, for example, what I've noticed in America, that a lot of people tend to be hyper-optimistic. I've always admired how Americans tend to be able to sugarcoat everything.
As a stereotypical pessimist, Hannah sometimes feels like a Debbie Downer. This expression is American slang for someone who makes others feel bad by focusing on the depressing aspects of things.
Americans, on the other hand, are typically seen as optimists who tend to sugarcoat things, make things seem better than they really are.
According to Hannah, many Americans are hyper-optimistic. She uses the prefix hyper to say that there is too much of a certain quality. Hypersensitive people are too sensitive. A hyper-optimist is too optimistic.
Besides your country of birth, age is another consideration in the optimism debate. When we're young, we have our whole life ahead of us, and it's easier to optimistically believe that everything's going to be all right.
The belief that everything's going to be fine is called the optimism bias. It isn't fixed, but changes as we age, something neuroscientist Professor Tali Sharot explained to BBC World Service programme Crowd Science.
So it's quite high in kids and teenagers. They think, oh, everything's going to be fine, And then it goes down, 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 and it hits rock bottom in your midlife, at which point the optimism bias is relatively small, and then it starts climbing up again, and it's quite high in the elderly population, and that goes absolutely against our view of the grumpy old man or woman.
After starting out high in children, the optimism bias hits rock bottom, the lowest possible level, in middle age, often because of work pressures, family responsibilities, or caring for elderly parents.
But optimism seems to increase again as we get older. This is surprising, as it goes against the image we have of the grumpy old man, a phrase to describe someone who complains a lot, is moody, and gets easily annoyed. Optimistic women, meanwhile, can look forward to longer, healthier lives.
Good news for you then, Sam, but I'm sticking with my pessimism. If I anticipate things going wrong, then I don't get disappointed when they do.
That's actually a fairly positive way of looking at things, Neil, but I'm not sure if most people would agree with you, or maybe they would. It depends on the answer to your question.
Right. I asked Sam what proportion of British people describe themselves as optimistic.
And optimistically, I said it was C, 80%.
Which was the correct answer.
Of course it was. Whether you expect good or bad things to happen to you, you're probably right. So why not focus on the sunny side of life, Neil? That way you've got nothing to lose.
OK, let's recap the vocabulary from this programme, Sam. You're certainly a glass-half-full person, someone with an optimistic attitude to life.
And you're something of a Debbie Downer, American slang for someone who brings everyone down by talking about the negative side of things.
If you sugarcoat something, you make it appear more positive than it really is.
The prefix hyper is used before an adjective to show having too much of that quality. For example, hypercritical means being too critical.
If something hits rock bottom, it reaches its lowest possible level.
And finally, the phrase grumpy old man can be used to describe someone who always complains, is intolerant, and gets annoyed easily. A bit like Neil.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our 6 minutes are up, but join us again soon for more trending topics and useful vocabulary here at 6 Minute English. Goodbye for now.
Bye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.
Hello, this is 6 Minute English from BBC Learning English. I'm Sam.
And I'm Neil. In this programme, we're discussing something we've heard a lot about during the pandemic, kindness. When was the last time you did something kind for someone else, Sam?
I gave my mum flowers last week.
Ah, that was kind. How did it feel?
It felt good, knowing I'd made her happy.
Right. It's something that psychologists are starting to prove scientifically, but that most of us knew all along. We feel just as good being kind to someone else as when someone is kind to us.
It reminds me of something called a random act of kindness. Have you heard of that, Neil?
Yes, things like helping a stranger cross the road. Small, everyday things people do to help others for no other reason than to make them happy.
Yes, and one of the main benefits of being kind is that we feel the kindness in ourselves. It's called the gift that keeps on giving, and it reminds me of my quiz question. In 2021, a global survey conducted for the BBC's Kindness Test asked people to name their top 5 random acts of kindness. So which kind act came top? Was it A, giving someone a smile, B, giving someone a hug, or C, giving someone your time to just listen?
They all sound wonderful, but what I'd really like is a nice big hug.
Okay, Neil, we'll find out later if that's the right answer.
Now, that good feeling Sam got from giving her mum flowers is something psychologists have become very interested in. During the past decade, over 1,000 academic papers were written, including the term kindness.
The author of one such paper is Dr. Dan Campbell-Meiklejohn, senior psychologist at the University of Sussex and researcher for the BBC's Kindness Test.
Here is Dr. Campbell-Meiklejohn discussing his findings with BBC World Service programme Health Check.
What we know from the science is, and what can seem counterintuitive, because giving can cost something of ourselves, is that we can experience a sense of reward when we are kind to others. So like when we eat a yummy food or have a pleasant surprise, the parts of our brain that help us remember these nice experiences and motivated us to do them again and again, they become active when we're kind. And we call this feeling a warm glow.
Usually giving something away, money, for example, means we no longer possess it. But kindness is different. Both the giver of kindness and the receiver experience what Dr. Campbell-Meiklejohn calls a warm glow, an inner feeling of happiness.
Nevertheless, for some people, giving something away equals losing it. So for them, being kind seems counterintuitive, opposite to the way you expect things should happen.
But on a chemical level, the brain doesn't agree. For our brain, being kind feels as good as any other pleasurable activity. For example, eating something yummy, something delicious, which tastes good.
OK, Sam, I can see that being kind is great in my personal life, but what about the ruthless world of business or politics? Surely there's no place for kindness there.
It's true that in many countries, politics involves fierce debate and criticism of anyone who disagrees with you. But there are those who believe it doesn't have to be like that.
Jennifer Nagel, for one. She's co-director of a movement called Compassion in Politics and author of the book We, written with the actor Gillian Anderson.
Listen as Jennifer explains her vision to BBC World Service programme Health Check.
Compassionate leadership leads to inclusive, cooperative outcomes which lead to fairer societies, lower crime rates, higher levels of health and well-being. And yet we have this idea that compassion somehow doesn't belong, that it can be dismissed in the same way as women have been dismissed as something fluffy and a nice idea, but not really practical. But in fact, the science behind compassion is that it actually takes courage to act with compassion.
Jennifer wants politics to be based on compassion, a strong feeling of empathy with the suffering of others and a wish to help them.
She says kindness is something dismissed as fluffy, soft and woolly, something not considered serious or important. But in fact, being compassionate is not easy and takes courage.
Jennifer's is a strong voice for a kinder, more compassionate society. But I bet even she could use a random act of kindness now and again. Maybe a hug?
That's right, Neil. A hug was one of the top 5 random acts of kindness I asked about in my quiz question, along with smiling and listening. But which came out on top?
I said it was B, giving someone a hug. So, was I right?
Giving a hug was the wrong answer, I'm afraid. The number 1 random act of kindness was A, giving a smile. But don't worry, Neil, I have a big hug waiting for you here.
Ah, thanks, Sam. That's so kind. OK, let's recap the vocabulary from this discussion about random acts of kindness. Small things people do to be kind to others.
Something counterintuitive doesn't happen in the way you expect it to.
Yummy means delicious or tasting very good.
A warm glow describes the pleasant inner feeling of happiness at doing something kind.
Compassion is a feeling of sympathy for the suffering of others and a wish to help them.
And finally, something fluffy is soft and woolly, not considered serious or important.
Our 6 minutes are up, but if you've enjoyed this programme, why not go out and perform your own random act of kindness? Goodbye for now.
Bye.
6 Minute English.
From BBC Learning English.